Welcome to the Fantasy Forecast. I'm John Romero of the Washington Post. It is week 11 of the NFL season for fantasy owners. The playoffs are very close, and for a lot of owners, that means a lot of decision making, whether it's injuries. We got a few buys, guys underachieving all across the league. So I'm here to help. If you would like to seek me out on Twitter for any advice, follow me. My handle is @John_J_Romero. So, how did I do in week 10? Not too shabby. In my fringe starters list or fringe players list, I recommended trying to use those other receivers on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Martavis Bryant kind of just did what Antonio Brown did, a couple catches for 40-some-odd yards, but I also included Juju Smith-Schuster, and he had the best game of all of them, about 100 yards receiving with a score. Terrence Williams, a big whiff there as the Dallas offense just completely vanished in week 10. And then my lottery pick, one of my lottery picks from last week, Rex Burkhead. Big week from him for a guy who was barely owned. And now that he's back from injury after a few weeks, he seems to be participating quite a bit in that offense. New England's receiving corps has been hurt. And so Burkhead seems to be very trending in fantasy circles this week, but I was a week ahead, so just remember that. Looking forward to week 11. Who's on the fringe this week? Well, we're going to start off with a guy who probably you could say doesn't necessarily belong here, and that's Keenan Allen of the Chargers. Obviously, he's getting a high volume of targets, and for Allen owners, you probably can't really afford to sit unless you're getting just unbelievable production from others in your receiving corps. But Chargers at home against the Bills. Bills are decent defensively, but can be moved upon. I think the X factor here is that Phillip Rivers is going through concussion protocol, and there's the possibility he could not play this weekend. That would certainly need to temper expectations for Keenan Allen in Week 11. I think the disappointment in Allen is that he hasn't had a lot of huge games. And he hasn't found the end zone very often. I think one touchdown this season. But again, while I'm not crazy about the matchup overall, and certainly he's downgraded, if Rivers is unable to go, you're in a position as an Allen owner where you can't really pass on putting him in unless, again, you're just getting great production from two other wideouts. And again, you got a flex play. So pretty hard to argue that Allen isn't going to warrant being in one of those spots. But I wanted to raise him specifically because of the injury to Rivers and why expectations should be tempered in Week 11. Now, who else do I have on the fringe this week in Week 11? Let's start off with Samaje Perine of the Washington Redskins. He takes over for Rob Kelly in the backfield. Will probably be the primary ball carrier, but that isn't really saying a lot. The Redskins don't run the ball a whole lot. They don't call a lot of run plays. And they aren't really that effective at running the ball. They have injuries on their own line. And, anybody who needs to use Perine, he's certainly worth grabbing and stashing on one's roster. But Week 11 is not the week to play him. If you're forced into using him because you have buys, injuries, other depth issues, then you're really looking at a ceiling, I think, of 50 to 60 yards, and maybe you luck out with a 1-yard, 2-yard plunge, and that's what you're probably looking at. Redskins are going to continue to use Chris Thompson as their receiving back out of the backfield, and they have a tough matchup against New Orleans Saints. Saints have been very stingy against the run and very strong defensively for the season. So Perine owners certainly keep him on the roster, but if you can put in another option, at least you should be considering another option if you're considering Perine for your lineup this week. Now, another guy I have on the fringe list this week, Robert Woods of the Los Angeles Rams. Coming off a huge performance against the Texans in Week 10. Week 11, a lot tougher matchup. Minnesota Vikings, Rams are on the road, though they have played very well on the road. Goff has been particularly strong on the road, Jared Goff, the quarterback. And now the juggernaut offense comes into Minnesota versus a very strong defense. But I don't think that's reason to bench Robert Woods. I kind of entered the weekend thinking, a lot of people are going to jump on the Woods bandwagon, then he might have a flat game, and that very well could happen. But I think given you look at the numbers on Woods, he leads the team in targets, yards, great after the catch. And you've realized that the Rams offense is so diverse, it's not crazy to think Woods can have a decent game in Week 11 just from the volume of touches and targets that the Rams like to spread around. So I'm on board with having Woods as your wide receiver 2 flex play, because I can't imagine you have that many better options and a player that has produced the way Woods has, and you wouldn't consider him for the lineup. I think he's got to be a consideration if you have him. Now, moving on to my lottery tickets this week. I don't really have anybody for this week in particular, but I am going to bring up Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen was injured weeks ago, was put on IR, but he's coming back. It's not this week because Carolina is on a bye, but he's looks like he's full go for Week 12. And I was surprised in a couple of leagues I found him available. He's only owned, last time I checked, about 55% of ESPN leagues. So grab him if you can off the waiver wire before this weekend so that you have him in the weeks to come, and of course fantasy playoff weeks, which are not too far off themselves. So he's my lottery ticket, only because I'm advising you get him now because he's going to get picked up next week, and he's not on everybody's radar right now, and I don't think some owners realize he's available because they assume maybe the other owner kept him on the roster. But that's not the case in a lot of ways. So that is my last piece of advice for Week 11. Again, I'm John Romero of the Washington Post, and I hope you have a good week on the fantasy front. We'll be back next week. Good luck.